Hey, welcome to this week's episode of The People's Report, News for the Left, brought to you by Solidarity TV. Today is April 29th, 2026. What can the Gulf Stream tell us about the climate catastrophe? Which state is indoctrinating students with a Middle Eastern religion? Why is the UAE leaving the world's largest oil cartel? Why is the USDA contracting Palantir to track food production? Why do federal judges support ICE's use of chemical weapons to gas out over 200 apartments endlessly? What three-letter agencies are pillaging the Congo this time? How is Israel turning to techno-fascism to occupy Palestine and Lebanon? How is the left wing failing in Europe? What happens when police surveillance is used for personal gain? How many data centers can you cram into a small town of 7,000? And how are the people fighting them off? All these topics and more in tonight's episode of The People's Report. Timestamps and links in the episode description.
Well, don't feel so devastated if you're feeling alienated, because it turns out you're not alone. Just open up your heart, let the revolution start, and grab that megaphone. Solidarity, solidarity, I need you and you need me. Solidarity, 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 solidarity.
Scientists warn the Gulf Stream is shifting north, which means an ocean current collapse is imminent. April 4th, 2026, via Earth.com. For years, scientists have worried that the Atlantic Ocean circulation system, which plays a key role in regulating temperatures in the Northern Hemisphere, is slowing down. A new modeling study adds an unsettling detail. If the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, AMOC, weakens, the Gulf Stream's path should gradually creep northward along the U.S. East Coast. Satellite observations suggest that's already happening. The same model shows that a sudden, sharp jump in the Gulf Stream's route could be an early alarm bell for a much bigger breakdown. The research was led by René van Westen and Henk Dijkstra at the Utrecht University in the Netherlands. The AMOC is essentially a giant conveyor belt. Warm, salty water moves north at the surface from the tropics towards Europe. As the water reaches higher latitudes, it cools, becomes denser, and sinks. That deep, colder water then flows back south along the ocean floor. The Gulf Stream is one part of that system, the fast surface current that runs from the Gulf of Mexico up the east coast and then swings east into the Atlantic around North Carolina. The concern is that AMOC is vulnerable to freshening in the North Atlantic. As Greenland's ice melts and dumps more fresh water into the ocean, it can dilute the salty water that normally sinks. Less sinking means less overturning, which can weaken the whole circulation. In their simulations, the researchers found that a weakening AMOC should tug the Gulf Stream northward, meaning it would reach the U.S. coastline farther north before veering into the open Atlantic. Professor Van Westen said this is appealing because the Gulf Stream's path is something we can actually monitor with satellites, making it a practical proxy for changes in the deeper circulation. According to the study, the satellite signal is already there. The Gulf Stream appears to have shifted north by roughly 50 kilometers over the past 30 years. Because the shift matches what the physics-based model predicts during AMOC weakening, it strengthens the case that the broader system is already slowing, the researchers noted. The model points to a specific mechanism, the deep western boundary current. This is a cold, salty flow that runs southward along the seafloor off North America as part of AMOC. Under normal conditions, this deep current flows beneath the Gulf Stream and exerts a kind of southward tug on it. But as the AMOC weakens, that deep boundary current weakens too. With less pull holding it down, the Gulf Stream's curve gradually shifts north. The most dramatic result comes far into the simulation. After centuries of gradual change, the Gulf Stream suddenly jumps more than 200 kilometers north in just 2 years. Then, about 25 years later, the AMOC collapses in the model. A rapid, unusual shift in the Gulf Stream's position could be a precursor to a tipping point collapse, offering one of the clearest early warning indicators scientists have identified so far. Van Westen said the key point is that the warning signal is straightforward to monitor. You can track the Gulf Stream's path from space, and if it suddenly lurches north, that could be a serious red flag. Earlier research suggests an AMOC collapse could sharply cool parts of Europe, even in a warming world. Some models indicate that extreme winter cold could occur, with cities like London occasionally approaching negative 20 degrees Celsius. That doesn't mean Europe would permanently turn into the Arctic overnight, but it does mean the climate could become much harsher and more volatile, with major knock-on effects for agriculture, infrastructure, and energy demand. The study also makes an uncomfortable point. If a sudden Gulf Stream jump really is a late-stage warning, it might be too late at that point to stop the collapse. But it could still be enough time to prepare. That could mean better home insulation, hardening infrastructure, and rethinking where certain crops can reliably grow. If the Gulf Stream's slow northward drift continues, it adds weight to the argument that the AMOC is weakening. And if the Gulf Stream were ever to jump north abruptly, the study suggests that might be the closest thing we have to a flashing warning light for a major Atlantic circulation shift, one with serious consequences for Europe and beyond. Obviously, all of this is strongly related to the climate catastrophe. The article says as much, that with cool waters coming from ice caps melting in particularly Greenland, but up north in general, it's adding colder water to the ocean, that is colder fresh water in particular, that is disrupting this system. It's probably one of the things that a lot of people don't really consider when it comes to the polar ice caps melting or rising ocean levels or global warming in general, climate change in general, is that the water itself being a different temperature is a problem. We'll talk about the sea levels rising, but everything that goes with that, aside from the catastrophic flooding, is literally changes in the currents coming from changes in, say, the Gulf Stream, for example. And all of this comes from man-made climate change. Now, I probably don't need to tell you that one of the biggest contributors to pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, if not the single largest contributor, is the United States military. Our intense bombings of Gaza and Lebanon, not to mention Iran, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, and everywhere else we've been bombing on Earth, but especially in Gaza over the last 2 years, has been so incredibly destructive in terms of climate itself, let alone the destruction we've wreaked on the ground there. And again, are mimicking the same in Lebanon now. These crises, these humanitarian crises, have resulted in an escalation of the climate crisis. All things that easily could be avoided if we just stopped being violent. Not the United States ever will, but this is why the climate catastrophe has gotten to the point at which it has. First, rapid industrialization across the world and a kind of disregard for pollution. Now, granted, in the early years of the Industrial Revolution and in mass industrialization, we didn't exactly know the long-term effects. Of course, a bunch of it was still kind of being covered up or dismissed. The classic seaside vacation to feel better was because it was finally air that wasn't filled with pollutants. But now we have all the science and all the evidence of satellites, etc., that can really study this and prove that man-made, or that man-made effects, that effects of humanity is causing and driving the climate crisis, and we're not really doing much about it. I mean, people love to complain about Chinese emissions, and China was a pretty big polluter, but they've been taking enormous steps to change that. And again, a lot of that pollution came from rapid industrialization, and now they're scaling back both their industrialization, but also their pollutants. The United States and the West in general is feeling no such kind of way, and again, the military is far more pollutant than even China is. And all over. And if you think about it for a few seconds, it's not that surprising. We're running air conditioning in all those tents that we have set up for our military guys across the Middle East that are thankfully now being withdrawn due to the actions taken by Iran in particular. The entire NATO mission is pulled out of Iraq. That's fantastic, and that's going to be a positive for the climate crisis. It's going to help stem the rapid climate change that we've been driving. So another win for Iran and for the axis of resistance. One of the other things about this that the article points out is that it's going to be, this rapid cooling is going to be catastrophic for the global north, for Europe and England in particular, but for the global north at large. And as bad as that is, and of course it's bad, say what you will about England, we don't want to see climate catastrophe, destroy London, maybe a little, but, not really. People live there. And already there's a huge problem with climate change creating harm in England in particular. And as much as we like to laugh about the heat waves and that we might see coming and causing problems for the British, their infrastructure is not designed to respond to these heat spikes. They've built their society around a different climate, effectively, that's now rapidly being changed. And this is why these problems are happening. Even though, we see it's 70-some degrees, that's not that bad. When your house is trapping all that heat because it's designed for cooler temperatures, it's going to be a huge problem. Just like how if the Bahamas suddenly got really, really cold. It's not designed to deal with intense cold. It's designed to keep people comfortable in heat and sun. And so the infrastructure is just not there. But around the world, especially in the global south, the climate catastrophe is causing problems for real people right now. We just write them off because they are non-Western, non-European, non-white, global Southerners. And from drought and famine in various parts of the world that we ignore because it doesn't affect us, because we can just buy our food from the grocery store. We're living in places that don't have these problems, and they're living in places that only have these problems because of our industrialization, I mentioned industrialization in order to emphasize the point that we are causing the climate catastrophe and not doing anything about it because it makes the capitalists these short-term profits. I'm not opposed to industrialization. Obviously, we need industrialization. Yeah, we got along pretty well for 200,000 years without it. That time is over. We're not going to go back to pre-steel, to the Stone Age. Don't take it the wrong way. But our actions have contributed to this, and we need to rein in the capitalists who have no interest in changing things from the trajectory that they're on because it makes them short-term profits. They're going to be able to then sell us, of course, increased infrastructure in order to have us either deal with it or just die, like we see in England right now. They're having difficulties with summer heat, so their infrastructure has to change in order to cope with it. From installing air conditioning, which increases power draw, which decreases the amount of available power and can increase rates, which means that poor people aren't going to be able to afford it and rich people can. So these are some of the very tangible ways that this is going to affect our daily lives, even when we don't factor in things like rising tides and warming waters, or in other places, cooling waters and desalinated waters in our oceans. If you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. Federal Appeals Court upholds Texas 10 Commandments law, April 21, 2026, via the New York Times. A federal appeals court on Tuesday narrowly upheld a Texas law that requires public schools to display posters of the 10 Commandments in classrooms. By 9-8, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit ruled that the law does not violate the separation of church and state, reversing 2 lower court decisions. The court also ruled the measure does not restrict parents' rights to direct their children's religious upbringing. Students are neither catechized on the commandments nor taught to adopt them, the ruling said. Nor are teachers commanded to proselytize students who ask about the displays or contradict students who disagree with them. Since Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican, signed a law in 2025 mandating the religious displays, families of various faith backgrounds have challenged it, arguing that the law amounted to state endorsement of religion. The law was passed amid a broader conservative push to infuse Christianity into public schools, and several other Republican-led states have passed similar laws. The organizations representing the 15 Texas families who filed the lawsuit said in a statement that they were disappointed in the decision and plan to ask the Supreme Court to reverse it. The Texas law mandates the displays in a conspicuous location in each classroom on a typeface visible from anywhere in the room. Posters must be at least 16 inches wide and 20 inches tall, and must include the text of a particular version of the Ten Commandments. Schools are not required to purchase the posters, but they must accept donations of them. In separate rulings last year, 2 federal judges in the state sided with the challengers, saying the law likely violated the First Amendment. Those rulings effectively blocked the law's enforcement across 24 Texas school districts, including in Houston and Austin. But the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, had encouraged school districts that had not been blocked to hang the Ten Commandments posters, threatening legal action against those that did not comply. The organizations representing the families said the ruling goes against fundamental First Amendment principles and binding U.S. Supreme Court authority. The First Amendment safeguards the separation of church and state, and the freedom of families to choose how, when, and if to provide their children with religious instruction, they said. This decision tramples on those rights. After the law was passed, a group of conservative legal groups and churches raised funds to distribute posters to districts across the state. First Liberty Institute, a Christian legal organization, was one of those groups. In a statement on Tuesday, Kelly Shackelford, the organization's chief executive, said the Ten Commandments are critical to the nation's history. Banning them from schools because they are religious is not justified by the Constitution and would undermine a comprehensive education for America's students, Mr. Shackelford said. For those who may be unfamiliar with the Ten Commandments, the mythology behind them is that Moses, who is the leader of according to mythology, the leader of the Jewish people as they leave Egypt and return to the land of Canaan, and as he's leading them around the desert, because they're in the Sinai for 40 years, because I guess no one knows how to go north. Technically it's because God cursed them, so they're not allowed to go in, but whatever. Moses goes up onto the mountain and gets these 10 commandments from God, and they're supposed to lead the Jewish people and be the kind of framework for the Jewish legal doctrine. Again, as they're leaving Egypt and entering the land of Canaan, which again is entirely mythology and didn't actually happen, as much as Israel will try to pretend that it did, and the United States pretends that it does. So, it didn't happen, but that is the origin of these 10 commandments. They're part of the Jewish and then later on the Christian doctrine, and I don't know if they play any role in Islam. Someone would have to tell me if they do. And they're kind of like the foundational texts of the goods and the bads. Mostly the bads. It's mostly, here's what you don't do. I'm going to read some of them to you in just a moment. So they're fundamental to, in particular, Christianity. I honestly don't know if in modern Jewish tradition, if the Ten Commandments are all that important. But in modern, in particular, Protestant and evangelical circles, the Ten Commandments are considered to be the basic framework for right and wrong in daily living. So, putting them up in classrooms is expressly a Christian thing. In particular, obviously a Christian nationalist thing, because you're not going to put them up in every single classroom if you're not trying to have some kind of doctrine or indoctrination. And before I even get into the specifics of them, just to point out how stupid this is, the article says that, the guy in text is like, oh, well, this is fundamental to American history. It's not. It's not. The United States is not founded as a Christian nation, as much as the American Christians and the evangelicals would like to pretend. The founding fathers were largely not Christian. They were deists, and I'm not really going to get into the theology of that. Basically, the idea is that, God might exist. There probably is some sort of entity that we understand to be divine and godlike. They were not, however, Christian. Some of them were not expressly Christian, not in the same way we understand Christianity today at all. So the idea that the United States is founded as a Christian nation is completely false. The under God in the Pledge of Allegiance was added in the 1950s to differentiate us from those godless communists. So, our the Ten Commandments in particular do not have any bearing on our on our legal order. So, and I'm just going to go through a couple of these just to point out how ridiculous it is to have these in the classroom, just from a kind of theological standpoint. Number 1, thou shalt have no other gods before me. So basically, I'm not going to bother explaining these. They're self-explanatory. The very first one is an affirmation of the Christian faith. Right off the rip, only Christianity is real. So putting it in and I guess technically you could argue that would, because the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians all worship the same God. You could say that's an affirmation of all three of them, I guess, if one were to make that argument. But, it's just clearly Christian messaging from the get-go. So the argument that, they're not proselytizing to students, they are fundamentally doing so by having them in the classroom in a conspicuous place that you can read them from any point in the room. Also, no one has ever felt driven to follow the Ten Commandments, like ever. No one has ever heard the Ten Commandments and been like, oh my goodness, I have to change my ways. Even in the mythology themselves, the Jewish people kind of totally ignore them. See, number 2, don't make any graven image, whatever, it's not important. Don't take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. That is exactly what's going on here right now. Just fundamentally, this means that, don't use God as an excuse to get what you want. And that's exactly what the Christian nationalists in America do. So, they're not exactly following these. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. No one does that. Only Orthodox Jews do that. Christians, it's usually the Sunday, but, they all watch Sunday Night Football is a thing. Honor thy father and thy mother. Definitely not. This is my favorite one. Thou shalt not kill. Dude, that's a fundamental aspect of U.S. history, is killing people. That's all we do. It's how we got this place. We just committed mass murder and genocide. Now we're doing it again the world over. So I don't exactly know why putting this in classrooms is going to help anybody. And they say, oh, God says not to kill, and then we go and do that as our day job. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Tell that one to Donald Trump. And thou shalt not steal. Again, how do you think we got this country? Don't bear false witness against thy neighbor. And don't covet. So many of these are fun. I guess there is an argument to be made that they are a fundamental part of American history, because so many of them are expressly broken by the fundamental existence of the United States of America. Theft, murder, stealing. Expansionism could be considered under coveting. But imagine the uproar if Michigan tried to put, texts about Sharia law in all of their schools, starting in Dearborn. How many people would go militantly ballistic over that? And I would say rightfully so. I don't think that any religious teaching should be in our public schools, because they're public. They're not for religious education. The United States should not be promoting and should not be instilling religion into schools. Again, it's part of the First Amendment. Not that the First Amendment has ever mattered. Not that any of the amendments have ever mattered, obviously. But, one could at least pretend, right? And it's just another step on the road to affirming the United States as an expressly Christian nationalist state, which it has been since, at the very least, Ronald Reagan. Elements of it long before, I think with Richard Nixon is kind of when it started getting there. But the United States is expressly a Christian nationalist state. We're trying to become more Christian nationalist, more fascistic in that regard, and to make the place more and more unwelcome to non-Christians. Which is also kind of funny because of how many people in south of the border are Christian coming to the United States, and we don't want them in here. And not to mention all of the Christians that we are so happily ready to kill in the Middle East, particularly in Lebanon and Palestine. But it's a sickening turn of events. It's not a surprising one. Louisiana is also one of these states who is trying to do Ten Commandment rules. And really what it boils down to is sheer performance. It's a performative expression of Christianity as not as a faith, but as a religion and as a doctrine. And I don't mean that in a more traditional religious sense, but in a political sense. Christianity as a political identity, Christianity as a political signifier, Christianity as conservatism. It is similar to the reinforcement of Zionism being Judaism, that Judaism is inextricable from Zionism, inseparable from Zionism. They're doing the exact same thing with Christianity and fascism, or Christianity and white ultranationalism, which they've been doing and succeeding at for a very long time. Across the entire United States, again, really since the Reagan administration, but before that, Christian nationalism and white nationalism have been intertwined since at least the days of the first days of the Ku Klux Klan, and honestly, since the Spanish conquistadors first arrived in the New World. This has been the driving force behind this colonial violence. Or rather, it has been the superstructure covering the driving force behind this colonial violence. The United States, being a Christian nation, is not why it is the way that it is today. We use that as a way to get other people on board or to ignore the actual realities behind the United States as a colonial structure, as an imperialist structure, and as a capitalist structure. And Christianity and Christian nationalism are just some of the covers that we use to disguise that and to reaffirm commitment to it on a level that goes beyond material possessions. Solidarity Television is an independent grassroots news organization. That means we rely exclusively on viewers like you. Support us at solidaritytelevision.org. UAE leaves OPEC to pursue accelerated production. April 28, 2026, via Axios. The United Arab Emirates said Tuesday it's exiting OPEC after more than 50 years, a blow to the powerful alliance of big oil producers. The UAE is the group's third largest producer, and the departure will make it tougher for OPEC to control output and prices. The country has previously bristled at production quotas under OPEC's market management strategy, but the departure came as a surprise. The UAE pointed to rising energy demand over the medium to long term. The decision reflects the UAE's long-term strategic and economic vision and evolving energy profile, including accelerated investment in domestic energy production, the country's energy ministry said. The move reinforces its commitment to a responsible, reliable, and forward-looking role in the global energy markets, the statement added, while vowing to stay committed to market stability. The country is pumping about 3 million barrels per day before the Iran war, which has forced Persian Gulf oil states to pare back production, but has reported output capacity of around 4.8 million barrels per day and growing. A structurally weaker OPEC with less spare capacity concentrated within the group will find it increasingly difficult to calibrate supply and stabilize prices, Rystad Energy, a research and consulting firm, said in a note. The move is a politically big deal, even though it doesn't have near-term effects with the Strait of Hormuz throttled and Persian Gulf producers unable to ramp up output, said Daniel Sternoff, senior fellow with Columbia's Center on Global Energy Policy. It's a break with one of Saudi Arabia's core priorities and comes as the UAE has felt the US, Israel, France, and other countries have proven to be better allies during this war than their neighbors, he said via email. The UAE's withdrawal could be positive for the US, said Richard Goldberg, a former Trump administration official who's now a senior fellow at the Hawkish Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Between Iran and Russia working to undermine the Gulf Arab states every day, while the US demonstrates historic commitment to their defense, why stay in bed with your adversaries when you can realign with your closest oil-producing ally, the United States, Goldberg said in a statement. While the decision comes amid the Iran war, today's move has much longer-term repercussions. With oil demand nearing a peak, the calculation for producers with low-cost barrels is changing fast, and waiting your turn inside a quota system starts to look like leaving money on the table, writes George Leon, Rystad's head of geopolitical analysis. My general rule of thumb is that if the UAE does something, it's bad and stupid. So, off the rip, I'm going to say the UAE leaving OPEC is bad and stupid. And looking into it a bit more, yeah, probably. The UAE is quitting OPEC. So, first, before I get into why, let's explain what OPEC is, if you're unfamiliar. OPEC is, by definition, a cartel. But it is a coalition of, at the moment, 12, because the UAE will be leaving on May 1st, so just in a few days. And it's a union of 12 countries that work together to set oil prices. The reason being that the initial motivation was to compete with Western oil corporations in order to give these countries more power over their own natural resources and to try to win back a little bit more sovereignty on the global market. By and large, that has sort of prevailed for some of these countries. So the countries presently as part of OPEC include the UAE, for now, Algeria, the Republic of the Congo, so that would be Congo-Brazzaville, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Libya, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. So some of those countries have been able to achieve sovereignty as through their oil markets. UAE, arguably, Saudi Arabia, Algeria to an extent, Iran, Kuwait, but Venezuela, Libya, and Iraq have all been destroyed by NATO. So it hasn't worked out for them entirely. So the reason that the UAE is quitting is it believes that rather than having to work in cooperation with other people to produce limited amounts of oil, they think that they can produce, if they set their own prices and produce their own oil on their own, they'll be able to get a lot richer doing that than playing on the team. They also want to make sure that their economic interests remain tied to the United States and Israel rather than to places like, again, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Libya, Algeria, etc. So right now, especially in the face of the U.S.-Iran war, being economically tied to Iran when they are a U.S. ally isn't in their best interests. Additionally, the UAE has been getting heat from me and from everybody else in the world, including some of its friends in OPEC, because of their international interference, most notably in the Congo and Sudan and Yemen, who the UAE famously got blown out of very recently. So the UAE is trying to play it on their own and trying to be a U.S. plaything instead of being on a team with other people that might be able to offer it a little bit more sovereignty, in the pursuit of short-term profits. Obviously, this is the entire MO of Abu Dhabi and the Emirates in general, is that it is a short-term profit-seeking organization that will rape, murder, and steal to get a few extra dollars. They're illegitimate state. They are literally a slave state, and their oil production is honestly stolen from Oman, if you ask me. All that money should go there, but it's all money that is stolen from workers and used to create genocidal violence in Sudan, to support Israel and the United States in their wars on Yemen, Libya, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran. Need I continue? And with Venezuela now out of the question, of course, it's looking more and more like the OPEC team is maybe not on the best foot. Now, OPEC has historically been very powerful. In fact, if you're old enough to remember the 1973 fuel crisis, that was in part started deliberately by OPEC as a boycott of oil to all countries that were supporting Israel in the 1973 so-called Yom Kippur War, or the fourth Arab-Israeli War? I think it's the fourth. And so this created, this along with the UK miners' strike and decreased oil production in the United States, created a catastrophic change in the way of life for Americans and for Westerners at large. They really felt the power of OPEC, or more accurately, OAPEC, because it was the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries. So it was the Arab majority in OPEC plus Egypt and Syria, if I remember correctly. And they boycotted the any country. So they represented between 30 to 40% of oil production in the world. So the UAE leaving that also means that OPEC itself is weaker as an international polity on the global stage. Not that it's been doing much anyway. We've never seen that again. Saudi Arabia, of course, is a freak state alongside the UAE. Big fans of U.S. imperialism, the Saudis are, and are doing their own neo-colonial war on Yemen. Have been losing, of course, but not as badly as the UAE, because again, everything the UAE does is bad and stupid. And I say that because, look at them. They're not succeeding anywhere. So that's basically what's going on there. The oil crisis, honestly, really radically transformed the United States. It kind of killed the hippie era, took away the treats from the treatlerites that were saying peace and love, man. And although, of course, they only meant peace and love for whites, and on occasion American blacks as well, but largely not. And just really led to, the strong America type of stuff that we got from Ronald Reagan later on. So that's what OPEC is. That's why the UAE is quitting. That's why it was part of it in the first place. Qatar quit OPEC not too long ago for kind of the same reasons. But that's what's going on. The oil cartel OPEC is now doesn't have as much influence. The UAE has officially completely thrown in its lot with Western powers, and I guess we'll see how that all ends up. Did you know the People's Report is produced for video and audio platforms? Stay informed by subscribing to us on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. USDA and Palantir signed $300 million software purchase agreement, April 22, 2026, via Reuters. The U.S. Department of Agriculture and software company Palantir Technologies on Wednesday announced the signing of a $300 million blanket purchase agreement, the BPA. The agreement is aimed at supporting the National Farm Security Action Plan, NFSAP, the release said, adding that it will also modernize how USDA delivers services to America's farmers. Palantir said it will provide operational software to enable USDA to improve service delivery for farmers and government field staff. The BPA will build on Palantir's existing work with USDA's Landmark platform and will support the One Farmer, One File initiative. Statement noted that Landmark is enabling USDA to transform how farmers report acreage through self-service digital tools. Protecting America's farmland is protecting America itself, and this work gives USDA the visibility and speed needed to safeguard our food supply, said USDA Chief Information Officer Sam Berry. Well, more and more of our government is being sold out to the techno-fascists. Big surprise. Now it's the USDA. Palantir, as we know, is an evil corporation. We just read last week, if you watched that, they have created a manifesto detailing their plans for the future. And really, they are, I don't want to say developing a shadow government. I feel like I don't want to sound or get too conspiratorial here. But they are, this is, the United States is a capitalist state. We run on behalf of and by corporations. The big corporate interests right now, among all the traditional ones, the growing dog in the fight is AI, tech, and surveillance corporations, Palantir being the biggest among them. Palantir Also is a reason for concern because it's got its mitts in healthcare, in surveillance, policing, in data gathering, and it is an open supporter of Israel. Now, it's important that we cut the wheat from the chaff here. Palantir is not run by Israel, and Israel does not run the United States. It's not going to use Palantir to manipulate the United States. Israel is a puppet of the United States. Israel is the right hand of imperialism, sure, but the right hand does not guide the body. They are a distilled form of American imperialism, which is, of course, the highest stage of American capital. So what we have is American capitalists doing things in another part of the world that they have decided to call Israel. It's really not anything unique or separate, and it's certainly not running the place. Even though Palantir is an avid ally, that does not necessarily mean that Israel or Palantir is controlling the U.S. at the behest of Israel. It is in American corporate interests in particular. Please keep that in mind. So why the USDA? Now, they say, oh, well, we've got to supervise and help maintain and secure American farmland and food production and food distribution and such, which I guess could theoretically be a noble goal. But how often in the news recently have we been seeing complaints about Chinese business buying U.S. agricultural land? That is, in my opinion, based on my further study of this, one of the big reasons why Palantir is getting involved is to help fight or curb or keep track of what American businesses see as the Chinese threat. Does China threaten the United States? No. Does China threaten American citizens? Certainly not. Do we have anything to fear from China? Of course we don't. Look how far away they are, at the very least. And they have no interest in making our lives worse. The United States, China's whole strategy to fight the United States is do nothing and then win. It's been working out really well for them. So they're not doing anything. They're still winning. If we want to view our relationship with them as strictly adversarial, it shouldn't be. We can change that. We should not be seeing China and the Chinese people as our adversaries. They've done nothing to us. They have no intention of doing anything to us. It is us, and when I say us, I of course mean our government, who has intentions of doing things to them, both the Chinese government and the Chinese people. That is one of the big motivators, however, for Palantir being involved in surveying and surveilling U.S. farmland. It's not about, and sure, yeah, maybe having large nationwide investigation into crops in general could help people prepare for problems coming from the climate crisis or other such natural disasters or whatever. But, do we trust Palantir to actually have our best interests in mind? Hell no. Do they? Absolutely not. Are they going to be doing anything beneficial with this information? No. They're moving us towards techno-fascism, towards what some have described as techno-feudalism, and they are working to supplant the democracy that we have with raw, open capitalism, which of course we already have. But I specify raw and open because they don't want us to think about or get involved in politics, like we heard right from their manifesto. They think politics isn't that deep, bro. Just mind your own business. Don't get so heated about it. And all the while they are getting their hands very, very deep in the political pie. So Palantir is maybe not a threat to the United States. It is an offshoot of the United States. It is nothing outside of the ordinary for the United States. Certainly, we all know Standard Oil or U.S. Steel or anyone else, the Pennsylvania Railroad, would have been thrilled with the ability to do all this if they had it back then. We have it now, so that's why things are happening the way that they are. The United Fruit Company got the United States to knock over half a dozen countries in Central and South America for bananas, and banana profiteering, right? So the United States has always been at the beck and call of corporate interests. Palantir being the new corporate interest on the block does not mean that anything has radically changed, just the technology behind making things happen has. So, yeah, it's not great that these companies are diversifying either. The railroad companies used to be really big into this. They were into telecommunications as well as transit and shipping. Kind of a big problem. So this is just a new form of that. Oh, and they also owned coal mines and stuff like that. Coal mines and iron factories and whatnot in order to, have their hands in all the pots. So Palantir getting involved in all these different aspects, again, is not particularly new. It is no less concerning. So, Union Pacific owning railroads, or Southern Pacific in particular, because that's what Sprint is. Sprint, like the phone, it originally stood for Southern Pacific Railroad International Network of Telephony or something like that. So it's not particularly new that they're getting involved in everything. Just the amount that they can do. Southern Pacific was never able to send drones to bomb New York City. It just straight up wasn't there. So Palantir being involved in weapons as well as agriculture and healthcare and surveillance and all of that, the magnitude of it is concerning, but it's not new, and it's not antithetical to the very fundamental nature of the United States of America. If you like the People's Report, check out our other shows at solidaritytv.org. Appeals Court blocks limits on federal force and tear gas at Portland ICE site. April 28, 2026, via Oregon Live. A 3-judge federal appellate panel voted 2-1 Monday to continue to block lower court orders that restricted federal officers' use of tear gas and other munitions against protesters outside Portland's U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement building. The majority on the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals panel voted to extend the temporary hold pending a full appeal of a March 6th order by U.S. District Judge Amy Baggio that restricted federal officers from deploying tear gas and other chemicals that could seep into the nearby Gray's Landing apartment complex. The majority also extended the hold on U.S. District Judge Michael H. Simon's March 9th order barring the indiscriminate use of force against protesters and freelance journalists. In each case, the majority also blocked any further lower court proceedings until the full appeals are heard. The ICE field office in South Portland has become the focal point of protests of President Donald Trump's mass deportation policy since last June. It lies across the street from the 209-unit Gray's Landing. The majority overruled Baggio's finding that residents of the affordable housing complex and its owner, Reach Community Development, had a constitutional right to bodily integrity and to be free of exposure to chemicals deployed by federal officers. We hold that there is no such right, the opinion said. Neither the district court nor the plaintiffs have provided any indication that the substantive due process right they claim is to be found in our constitutional text or structure or is deeply rooted in our nation's history and tradition. Our founding document does not address neighborhood grievances concerning unwanted smells and gas, no matter how unpleasant those may be. That is a province of localities and tort law. Much of the evidence shows the government is trying to clear the entrance of the ICE facility in the face of an unrest and an unruly crowd, the opinion said. And while some individual incidents might indicate an arguably disproportionate use of force, they alone do not amount to an unwritten policy of retaliation. The opinion found that vandalism, blocking street traffic, and trespassing on ICE property represented immediate threats to public safety. While the court might find that officers used too much force or their force was not justified, that does not mean that they acted to silence protesters' speech, the majority found. The majority disregarded the findings of Gil Kurlikowski, a former U.S. Customs and Border Protection Commissioner, saying the plaintiff's expert cannot make legal findings that the government had an unwritten practice of First Amendment retaliation. Judges Eric C. Tung and Kenneth Kyo Lee, both Trump appointees, were the majority in each ruling. Judge Ana de Alba, a Biden appointee, dissented, arguing against any holds on the orders. She found the interests of the residents of the affordable housing complex outweighed those of the federal officers. It would be reckless if the government did not understand the impact of munitions that it used, especially given the evidence that exposure to such munitions can create severe adverse health effects, de Alba wrote in her dissent. Attorneys from Democracy Forward, who are among those who represented Gray's Landing residents, said in a statement that they are concerned about the impact on the residents who have been exposed to toxic gas inside their homes. They said they will continue to fight in court to restore the protections. We are deeply disappointed by the court's decision to eliminate critical protections for the residents of Gray's Landing, the statement said. Pausing that relief now places families, children, seniors, and people with disabilities back at risk while this case continues. No large-scale clashes have occurred outside the building since Baggio's or Simon's orders. The latest appellate rulings come just 4 days before May Day, which is expected to draw large-scale demonstrations to city streets. This ruling really should be incredibly upsetting to everybody, particularly everybody in the United States, no matter what end of the political spectrum you're on. Because if the federal government can have the authority to give its stooges free rein to inflict endless non-lethal or less than lethal force and violence against you, then really what options do you have? You know, even if you are hardline MAG and you're like, yeah, good thing the liberals are getting cooked out of their houses, what's to stop the next Democrat president from doing the exact same thing to you? And we all know that they would, of course. They did that to all the Palestine demonstrators on the college campuses, no problem. So, you know, Joe Biden is more than happy to unleash state violence against the public, just as Trump has. So, this sheer amount of violence that the state is gleefully committing against the public should have all of us angry. We shouldn't be scared. We shouldn't be quaking in our boots or anything like that. But we should be, A, ready for when it does come down on us, and B, angry, and getting everybody else to realize that this will eventually come down on us, particularly if you've been identified as a potential nihilistic violent extremist as described by the National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, NSPM 7. So, again, if you have views that are anti-Christian or differ from traditional American views on religion and family and whatever, all that bullshit, then the state might be looking to commit this violence on you. And if you are an extremist on religion, kind of stuff. So, and then I presently, with the current Republican administration, and probably with whatever Democratic administration comes next, are going to be using ICE goons to do whatever they want like this. The other really upsetting part of this is that they said, and again, let me read this back to you, that residents of affordable housing complexes, or just residents of neighborhoods, will say, that residents in American communities do not have a constitutional right to bodily integrity or to be free of exposure to chemicals deployed by federal officers. According to the federal judges, we hold that there is no such right, as neither the district court nor the plaintiffs have provided any indication that the substantive due process right they claim is to be found in our constitutional text or structure, or is deeply rooted in our nation's history and tradition. So, living in a place free of chemical weapons being deployed by federal agents is not expressly enumerated in the Constitution. Therefore, you do not have a right to complain about federal agents dumping so much chemical weapons on your street that it gets into your house. And we're talking about a building that could hold up to 209 families. 209 families. So even if every single one of these units had exactly one person living there, it's 200 people, over 200 people, 209 people obviously, 200 people who were being exposed to chemical weapons because they lived in the proximity of a government facility that has been given free rein to use endless, non or less than lethal force on random people on the street. The one part I do agree with is that it is not deeply rooted in our nation's history and tradition to give people bodily integrity. That is true. The United States does not care about your bodily integrity. The United States has never cared about your bodily integrity. Ask pretty much Any non-white ask anyone who isn't rich whether or not the United States cares about their bodily integrity. I'll give you a very, very clear example of this. In January 1st, 1808, the importation of Africans, or of people in general, to be used or possessed as slaves became illegal in the United States. Chattel slavery became illegal in the United States in 1865. So for that 60-year period in which chattel slavery was at its peak in the United States, the importation of human beings to be used as slaves wasn't permitted. So where did that slave population come from? It came from the United States not respecting or having deeply rooted in our history or tradition or giving a constitutional right to anybody bodily integrity. The United States does not care about your bodily integrity. This is why we don't have health care. This is why we've committed brutal atrocities to Native Americans. This is why we gave chemical weapons to Saddam Hussein to use against the Iranian people, and why we have blown up so many peoples in the Middle East and West Asia and North Africa. This is why we have committed rape after rape after rape of men, women, and children the globe over, anywhere our military goes. This is why we've committed endless sexual violence on women and continuing in the south of Korea and in Japan, but also previously during our occupation of Vietnam. This is why we dropped endless bombs on Laos and Cambodia as well as Vietnam. This is why we dumped Agent Orange all over Vietnam. This is why Operation Phoenix just allowed us to have a mass murder campaign in the deep south of Vietnam, because we do not care about bodily integrity. Bodily integrity means nothing to the United States. And if we want to take a look at a little bit more recent, does bodily integrity mean anything to the American ruling class who was so heavily invested in the Epstein affair? No. Why do so many Americans, and especially in the ruling class, violate people, particularly women and girls? We don't care about bodily integrity. Bodily integrity means nothing to the United States. It is not part of our heritage. It is not part of our tradition. It is not part of our history. It is not part of our customs, our legal framework at all. Bodily integrity is something we use sometimes to put some people in prison when they can be credibly proven that they deserve it, maybe. But really, bodily integrity goes beyond, actual, or I should say, legally considered crimes. What about the violation of your safety as a homeless individual? Does that preserve or is it an affront to your bodily integrity? Or police violence? Again, chemical weapons being deployed into random people's houses. Medical neglect. Drug abuse. Where is the bodily integrity there? When we send our military to go murder people in Iraq or Afghanistan, do we believe in bodily integrity? No. So that's the only part of this that I agree with. The federal courts have said it's open season on the American public. Gas them all. Who gives a shit? Not us. And you can't complain about it because you have no constitutional right to bodily integrity, and it's not rooted in our tradition. And that part, at the very least, is correct. This week's book recommendation is Here Where We Live Is Our Country by Molly Crabapple. Fresh off the presses, this book is the story of the once prominent socialist, secular, and anti-colonial Jewish alternative to Zionism, the General Jewish Labor Bund in Lithuania, Poland, and Russia, or simply, the Bund. Democratic Republic of the Congo creates a $100 million mining guard to protect critical minerals. April 27, 2026, via Financial Times. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is creating an armed security force to guard mine sites and secure supply chains in the resource-rich country as it deepens its minerals partnership with the United States. Backed by the U.S. and the United Arab Emirates, which both have growing commercial interests in the country's mining sector, the Mining Guard will cost $100 million to establish and will comprise up to 20,000 troops by 2028, according to a statement released Monday by the General Inspectorate of Mines. The Democratic Republic of the Congo signed a comprehensive economic and security agreement with the U.S. last year, as Washington bids to diversify its critical mineral sources away from China. The deal gives U.S. companies and trading houses preferential access to mining resources. However, progress on mining deals has been slow, partly because of the violent conflict in the country's east, which has left mines in the hands of the Rwanda-backed M23 rebel group. Raphael Kabengele, Inspector General of the Mines, said in a statement that the new unit would clean up the entire mining sector in the Democratic Republic of the Congo by eliminating practices contrary to good governance, transparency, and mineral traceability. The Democratic Republic of the Congo has become a focus for mining companies and investors, as well as countries seeking to gain access to the African nation's minerals. A U.S. government-backed consortium recently agreed to buy the copper and cobalt miner Chemath in the Katanga province, in the first big test of a partnership between the two nations. The Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos-backed mining startup Cobalt Metals has also started a broad program of lithium exploration in the country. A big part of driving investment in the DRC will require de-risking commercial assets. For investors to come in and inject billions of dollars, particularly in greenfield assets, will require great confidence that the asset is protected, said Gracelyn Bhaskaran, director of the Critical Mineral Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. Recruits to the unit will undergo an intensive 6-month training program and will be tasked with securing sites throughout the country's 22 mining provinces, as well as protecting cargoes being transported across the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Democratic Republic of the Congo has an existing mining police force, which will be largely replaced by the new group, according to the people familiar with the plans. The new guard would provide a reliable and stable security environment, the inspectorate said. The UAE has historically had a significant role in trading minerals mined in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, including gold and other metals. The Abu Dhabi Group International Resources Holdings is a majority owner of Alphamen, which operates the Bisi tin mine in North Kivu province. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is also planning to grow a strategic reserve of certain metals, officials told the FT this month. Despite cutting its funding for many UN peacekeeping programs under the Trump administration, the U.S. is still providing funds to the UN-backed MONUSCO force in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Man, how many times can I say Democratic Republic of the Congo in one article? This is, of course, Congo-Kinshasa. This is, if you look on the map, Congo. It's the big one. This is the one that was previously owned as a personal and private property of King Leopold II of Belgium. That resulted in his murder of up to, if not exceeding, 10 million Congolese people and his own capitalist pursuit of profit in the ivory and rubber industry in particular, as well as maintaining it as his own private land, and then bequeathing it to the Belgian government, who continued to abuse the people and its resources for their own profit up until it became nominally independent under Patrice Lumumba, who was then immediately murdered by Western forces and brutally murdered, and his body destroyed by, in particular, Belgian interests. Now, who's surprised to see that the UAE has its grubby little fingers in this pie as well? Not me. Again, everything they do is bad and stupid, and pillaging the Congo is no different. The Congo, specifically Congo-Kinshasa, because again, there's two of them, but the Congo, in this section, we're referring to, of course, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or Congo-Kinshasa, is rich. As Michael Parenti famously informed us in his very yellow speech, these countries are rich. The Congo is rich. It is not a poor country. You don't go to poor countries to make money. It is only the people in these countries who are poor. The Congolese people are poor because they are not because they are underdeveloped, but because they are overexploited. They are being robbed and pillaged by the United States, by Canada, by the UAE, by Israel, by Rwanda, believe it or not. Rwanda, of course, being a little colonial and imperialist wannabe. Of course, it's not imperialist. It doesn't meet any of Lenin's 5 points of imperialism, but they're an expansionist little guy right there in the heart of Africa, and uses its military to control and pillage and loot and rape the Congo. And of course, the United States does this exact same thing. The UAE does the exact same thing. Israel's doing the exact same thing. Canada is doing the exact same thing. Most, like 90% of mining corporations in the world are Canadian for a reason. And so when the United States and the UAE is like, hey, we're going to fork over a bunch of money in order to create a little private military to secure Congolese natural resources, who are they really securing those natural resources for? Is it for the Congolese? No, certainly not. The United States never, and the UAE certainly, never spends any money on anything that doesn't directly benefit them. They are doing this in order to create a comprador military in order to maintain supply from the Congo to the United States and to the UAE. But, I mean, what else can we say? Just look what they've been doing in Sudan. The UAE being involved is nothing but a blight on the world. Hopefully, Iran bombs them more. And Yemen, too. I'd love to see Yemeni shoes marching through Dubai. That'd be great. But the United States is doing this, of course, like the article declared, to try to get more resources from Africa than that they previously used to get from China in order to help prevent Chinese control over these natural resources, in particular lithium, but also cobalt, right? These are very important rare earth metals that are being used in particular in batteries, rechargeable or otherwise, electric vehicles, drones, phones, any kind of handheld device that uses, or any kind of device that uses a remote battery. Lithium and cobalt are used in them. Gold is another one. And like the UAE has a ton of gold resources, but there's no gold to be found in the Emirates. So where are they getting it from? They're looting it from Africa. Again, from Sudan, and then especially from the Congo as well. Congo is huge. Look it up on a map. Africa is a huge continent. It doesn't look as big on the map as it actually is if you're using the Mercator projection. But look it up. Africa's big. Congo is a huge country. They have a ton of natural resources. They have an immense pool to pull from, and all of it is being sucked out by American imperialism and neocolonialism. They don't have to send settlers to go do the looting for them anymore. This is what we mean by neocolonialism. They use a comprador class or an occupation class of people within the Congo to do it for them. So they have their Congolese overseers run these mines and plantations, if you will, to withdraw the wealth and then ship it back to America in exchange for political power in that section. So they don't have to use American settlers or Israeli settlers or Emirati settlers to do it. They just basically buy natives to use them as the settler force, kind of. And this is one of the reasons why Patrice Lumumba's death, his murder, was so catastrophic for the entire continent, but especially for the Congolese people. Removing their sovereignty and removing their aspirations towards sovereignty violently, and installing powers and persons that will allow foreigners to pillage and loot the entire country is appalling. And the Congolese, of course, are not benefiting from this. We all know that, obviously. The UAE is involved. Of course, no one, the indigenous peoples and the native peoples are not benefiting from this. But they're being worked to death in some places. Again, I've suggested before, go read the book Cobalt Red, and especially read Adam Hochschild's book, King Leopold's Ghost, about the history of the Congo. The looting that took place under King Leopold has not stopped. Just the person in charge has changed. The imperial, or the colonial power extracting the resources from the land has changed. And all of this is being used just to impoverish the Congolese people and steal what is rightfully theirs. The cobalt in the Congo belongs to the Congolese. The gold in the Congo belongs to the Congolese. The rubber, the ivory, the lithium, all the other rare earth metals, everything, the labor power of the Congolese people belongs to the Congolese. It does not belong to the Emiratis. It does not belong to the Americans. It does not belong to the Canadians. It certainly does not belong to the Israelis. It doesn't even belong to the Rwandans. It belongs only to the Congolese. And until the Congolese are able to take it for themselves, which is the thing that all of these other colonial powers are terrified of, and why they spend so much time, effort, and money in making sure that the Congolese do not take it for themselves, do not assert themselves, do not become sovereign, do not become independent, do not have any sort of revolution that is going to overthrow the neo-colonial occupation of the Congo, and the looting, and the rape, and the pillaging, and the murder that goes on there. The United States, the UAE, will spare no expense to make sure that that never happens in order to keep the Congolese an impoverished, enslaved workforce, and to take everything that they have for the benefit of not even the citizens. Sure, we American citizens benefit a great deal from the occupation of the Congo. Your phone being only however much you spent on it, they're upwards to $1,000 now, but even on the low end, $200-$300 phones that everybody has, you can buy multiple of a year. They're only that affordable because we rape and pillage the Congo. It is only that affordable because we steal from these people. But even then, the money that we pay for these phones does not even go to the Congolese people. It goes to Apple, it goes to Samsung, it goes to the mining corporations. And the Congolese people who do all the work to produce these resources that we use so heavily get pittance at best. They get crumbs off our banquet table. And we can look around and we can see that the capitalists are eating so much better than we are. And then you got to look and you got to realize that the Congolese and the other pillaged peoples of the global south have nothing because we've taken it from them for our benefit, and especially for the benefit of those on Wall Street and the benefit of those on top of the towers in New York City, Los Angeles, and Dubai. Hey comrades, let's remember the words of Chairman Mao: civilize the mind and make savage the body. This week, if it makes sense to you, let's rewind the clock back to our school days for our exercise. Load up a backpack with books or filled water bottles as weights and go for a long walk. If you can, increase your gait to a light jog. Big Tech is powering Israel's AI war machine. April 20th, 2026, via Zeteo. Israel's genocide in Gaza exposed how AI is changing warfare in terrifying and deadly ways. With the help of Big Tech, Israel, along with the US, is now expanding its use of AI in Iran and Lebanon, widening its testing ground for AI-enabled military technology, with more deadly consequences. Israel has long been one of the world's leading hubs for AI development. As of 2024, there are about 2,300 AI startups active in Israel, according to a report by Google Israel and Rise Israel, a technology think tank. Since then, that number has likely only risen as venture capitalists pour money into the industry. Roughly 1/4 of all technology startups in Israel are AI companies, supported by billions of dollars in funding. Tech giants have also deepened their relationships with Israel, tapping into their tech ecosystems to recruit talent and grow their businesses. NVIDIA recently announced plans to build a massive tech campus in northern Israel that will be home to AI research and development projects, and NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang has described Israel as the company's second home. All of this has happened as Israel assaults civilian populations in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, and Iran. A new report from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, the ISS, a think tank and leading authority on global security and military conflict, details exactly how heavily integrated AI is in Israel's weapon systems and military operations. According to the report, Israel has made significant investments to embed AI across its military tools and systems. These efforts range from the creation of an AI and autonomy administration within the Ministry of Defense's Directorate of Defense Research and Development, to empowering the Elite Intelligence Unit 8200 to build out the Israeli military's own AI capabilities. People wonder quite often why the United States clings to Israel so tightly. Is it some people, of course, come up with the racist theories. Other people assume that it has to do with religion, American evangelicalism. And that, of course, plays a not insignificant role. But the big reason is that Israel is an R&D department for American imperialism. They develop and then field test on live test subjects the Palestinian people and the Lebanese people all sorts of new technologies, from weapons to surveillance in particular. And that is why all these AI companies are so heavily invested in Israel. Now, one can point out the obvious, that Israel, being a fake country filled with posers, people who pretend to be something that they're not, people who create an artificial heritage for themselves, people who posture as something big and powerful but really are the most shallow, fake nation you'll see outside of maybe the UAE, that's 3 for 3 now, would be so enamored with AI. Obviously, it's as fake as they are. It implies depth with no effort. The Israelis are not a real country. They're not a real people. They are an amalgamation of people from around the world who have had their actual ethnic and historical identities wiped away in favor of a new fake, gossamer, imaginary tradition. So of course you're going to like AI. It's fake. It's a whole bunch of nonsense. If AI art were a people, it would be Israeli. So it's no wonder that these guys are so enamored with it. It's all bullshit, and it's a big lie that for no reason. But really, also, of course, these AI companies are doing surveillance. And this is what we're seeing with Palantir here in the United States and abroad. These guys invest so heavily in it for weapons, for surveillance, for control, for resource and wealth extraction, for the control of the public, which gets tested on the Palestinians and the Lebanese. They're testing their drone technology, they're testing their AI targeting technology, etc., 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 for the behalf of the American empire, of course. Previously the British, now the American. We've traded off. So that's what Israel does. And this is also why we have cause for concern for AI data centers here in the United States, because they're going to be doing the exact same thing. Only this time, who's it going to be tested on? And of course, again, I point out, I've said this before, but it's worth pointing out that it's not, the things that go on in the world are not bad because one day they might happen to us. They're bad because they're happening to people right now. But this is why these AI companies and such are all so committed to the so-called state of Israel. They've got a ridiculous amount of technology here. What do we got? 2,300 AI startups in 2024. First of all, that's just kind of embarrassing. That's also has a lot to do with the Israeli identity of the startup culture, because it's a whole bunch of people pretending to do something new and cool, but it's all, daddy's money. It's all, it's shallow. Their language isn't even real. I digress. That's not the point. But they're using AI technology to commit genocide in Palestine. They want to eradicate the Palestinian people in order, and of course, eventually then, the other people to create their greater Israel, but particularly right now, the Palestinian people. And they're using it to select targets in Gaza, they're using it to select targets in Lebanon, they're using it to surveil and control people in the West Bank, using it to find targets in Iran. And this is what it's for. It's all for killing and control, which is exactly what the United States already does on a global scale. But they want to automate it. They want to make sure that they can get rid of the human component so that way it can be more efficient, more violent, more aggressive, and with fewer dissenters. And who better to develop this than people who already have such a strong belief in ethnic superiority that genocide is not just on the table, but an active, gleeful choice. Very few other countries in the world feel this way. Azerbaijan is one of them. The UAE is probably another. But very few people feel this passionately about their own ethnic superiority and mass murder campaigns. You can't even convince Americans of that, for all of our faults. Broadly, you cannot convince Americans, at least not on an individual level. Obviously, on a structural level, that's what the United States does. But I digress. So all of these tech giants, NVIDIA, Palantir in particular, as named in this article, and all these other ones, are invested in genocide. They're invested in control. They're invested in violence and murder and mayhem because it's going to make them money. And just like people who work at Lockheed Martin, who work at General Dynamics, who work at Northrop Grumman, who work at Boeing, who work at Ball, etc., etc., these guys are all working towards the same goal, which is U.S. military control of the world and U.S. global hegemony and the murder of anyone who gets in their way. Hey, it'd mean a lot if you join our Patreon at solidaritytelevision.org. The political left is disappearing across Central Europe, despite Orban's defeat in Hungary. April 24, 2026, via Le Monde. Hungary's parliamentary elections of April 12th ended in a heavy defeat for nationalist Prime Minister Viktor Orbán and confirmed another major political trend in Central Europe, the complete disappearance of the left. Claiming to be a conservative, Orbán's successor Peter Magyar won after crushing all other traditional opposition parties. After having participated in 4 governments since 1989, the Hungarian Socialist Party will not have a seat in the new parliament. They'll take office on May 9th. In the new Hungarian parliament, the only opposition to Tisza, Magyar's party, will be represented by Orbán's Fidesz and the 6 MPs from the neo-Nazi-inspired Our Homeland Party. The situation in Hungary is not unique for the region. In the Czech Republic, the once mighty Social Democratic Party has not held seats in parliament since 2021. In Bulgaria, the Socialist Party, which has been in power 6 times since 1990, was also completely ousted from the assembly for the first time in the April 19th parliamentary elections. The last left-wing government in the region, Robert Golob's coalition, lost its majority in the March 22nd elections in Slovenia and announced on Monday, April 20th, that it would join the opposition, opening the door for the return of the ultra-conservative Janez Janša. According to the regional politics expert, these parties, which are often born out of former communist groups, initially managed a successful social democratic transformation in the 1990s by promising to temper the impacts of rampant economic liberalism, but then lost their electorate in 2 major phases. When the left returned to power, it continued liberalization and privatization policies, and first lost blue-collar workers, who turned to more nationalist and populist parties. Then, after Fidesz came to power in Hungary and Law and Justice in Poland in the 2010s, it lost urban, educated middle-class voters, who saw that left-wing parties were not the most effective at beating right-wing populists, argued Ernst Hillebrand, the director of the Hungarian office of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. In his view, while these 2 trends are a dilemma for the left throughout Europe, they have become more pronounced in Central Europe, where conservative populism is especially strong. In these countries, it is ultimately pro-European right-wing parties that have managed to unite democratic voters, both left and right, under their banners. Magyar and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk are prime examples. However, unlike Magyar, Tusk has made a small place for the left in his governing coalition since 2023. Issues such as immigration, diversity, or LGBTQ rights, powerful rallying points for the left in Western Europe, have never broken through, quite the opposite. Progressive parties in the region have been harshly attacked on issues of immigration and LGBT rights, even though they never really fought on those topics, said former Hungarian MEP Benedek Javor, noting that these attacks still cost them all credibility in national politics, especially after the 2015 migrant crisis, which so deeply divided Europe. In Romania, a Social Democratic Party, which remains the country's leading party even as it fell to 22% in the 2024 parliamentary elections, decided in 2025 to completely erase the term progressive from its statutes. The party explained that it did not want to be the party of ideological experiments or imported labels. Long close to the socialists, former Bulgarian President Rumen Radev, who won the April 19th parliamentary elections by a wide margin, is also a staunch opponent of marriage equality and immigration, as is Zoran Milanovic, the left-wing nationalist president of Croatia since 2020. Yeah, the big thing that a lot of people have been overlooking with Orban's defeat is that he was not defeated by the left. He was not defeated by the liberals. He was defeated by conservatives, just conservatives who were, broadly speaking, less of a freak than he was. Obviously, so glad to see Orban gone. He sucked. Big advocate for Israel. Big ally of Trump. A freak all the way around. Anyway, you cut it. And him getting defeated by Magyar is not the worst thing to have ever happened. We're glad to see him go. But it would have been nice if he were defeated by an actual left-wing candidate or even someone who was nominally left. And those are just dying out. I mean, it's a really, really sad day when the best hope that the left has in Central Europe comes from Poland. Kind of embarrassing. The Czechs like to brag about how much of an atheist country they are, but they don't. The left has zero representation in government in most of these countries, and we're left with the conservatives being the party and the opposition in Hungary being the far right and the alt-right. And I know I'm just repeating things that the article, you just heard me read from the article, but it's worth reiterating that everyone here, with the exception of a very small handful of people in Poland and Slovenia, are at best center-right. And it's very sad to see these old communist bloc countries forego left-wing thinking, but the article explains exactly how that happened. The right took power after the fall of the Soviet Union, a big widespread reactionary movement, of course, sponsored by the United States and NATO at large, and it started them on the path of these neoliberal reforms and shock therapy that kind of sucked. And then when the liberals came into power, literally nothing changed. And if that doesn't sound familiar to you, you're probably not an American. Because that's exactly the pace that this country's been going on itself, where we have the right come into power, do a whole bunch of messy bullshit, and then the left, obviously when I say the left here, I'm referring to Democrats, and they are not left at all. They are a center-right party themselves. But the liberals come into power, nothing changes. We feel good about ourselves a little bit, if we're not paying attention, of course. And Obama gets to throw kids in cages and no one says anything, gets to destroy Libya and no one says anything. He bombs Syria and no one says anything. And then, we get Trump and then all that bullshit happens. And then we get Biden, we feel good about ourselves, and then he commits genocide in Palestine and bombs Yemen and bombs Lebanon and Syria and Iraq. And then we don't say anything, and then Trump gets into power and we're like, oh my God, the horror. It's the exact same thing. We don't have, in America, a left. Yep, we have left-wing parties and organizations, and some of them are doing some great work. Others kind of need to step up the game a bit, but we don't have any of them in government. We have, a few members of the DSA, which isn't a political party, it's a political organization, in Congress. We have exactly one socialist in Congress, like one actual in the Senate rather, in exactly one socialist in the Senate, and he's a Zionist, a pro-Israel stooge. Sorry, Bernie, but there's a huge oversight, and you need to get with it or quit it. You can't be for genocide. Sorry, man. So, and it's the same thing. We got, and in Central Europe, they're saying, oh, well, the progressive stuff we have to drop. It's not winning over the people. The people are complaining about us being pro-LGBTQ+, or, in marriage equality, or et cetera, the traditional progressive stuff. Here in the United States, what are the Democrats doing for this upcoming midterms? They're rethinking these strategies in the exact same way, trying to see what sticks and what doesn't. What do they have to change to win over the middle masses? And it's for the exact same reasons. The liberals in America are not doing anything to change the progression of things. And it's convincing the uneducated, and unfortunately there's a lot of them, that nationalism might be the way to go. You know, you're sitting around and things are looking pretty stupid, and you see the liberals go, hey, we're going to change things, but you already know that we're not, because we haven't in the last 12 years we were in power. And then you see the Nazis go, hey man, we're going to make some real change. You should give us a chance, because we haven't had a real chance yet. Well, we all see what the idiots have been doing. And combine that with decades of anti-left-wing messaging and violence, and you get a whole bunch of people who think that the left is inherently the losing party, not worth trying out, and or morally wrong. And again, it's very sad to see this in a country in the United States that used to have a very strong labor movement. Of course, not the greatest of all time. Our labor movement's largely not been what we would want to see, maybe intersectional. Not really good at that. Maybe we will be someday soon, but historically, But we've had much, much stronger labor movements and power in the United States, worker power, proletarian power, from the 1870s to 1940s. And again, these countries in Central Europe were communist. I mean, the communists came into power in the Czech Republic and ran the Czech Republic pretty well for a very long time. Poland too. I mean, Polish situation was not always as great as it should have been. But I'm not here to discuss the intricacies and intimate details of the Polish history. But the Polish communists built Poland out of being completely destroyed in World War II. And we're coming from a country that 1/4 of its population was murdered. Its cities razed. And now it's one of the fastest growing economies. But it built itself up out of that horrible mess into being a fully functioning country, a robust country, thanks to the communist government. In a ridiculously short period of time, too. And it's sad to see these countries go the way of the United States and just lose all of its power. And I know that part of it has to do with, not to give them too much of an excuse, but part of it has to do with the fact that a lot of the so-called communists, as part of the communist or socialist parties in these countries, are a little old, or a little boomery, and are sticking with socialists, not because they're actually socialists, but because socialist is associated with the period of time in which they had really cool stuff. So, like, I know that was a big thing for I believe the Czech SPD, was that these guys weren't actually socialists, they were more like regular liberals, but they're like, oh hey, remember when things didn't suck? Yeah, socialism, but it was in name only, which is part of the problem, but people need to get back to their actual roots. It's sad to see Europe go this way. It's kind of worrisome to see Poland be the last remaining one, but remember, there's always hope. Ireland just finally got a socialist president again, Catherine Connolly. The very first Red Army in Europe was Irish. So, we're revolutionary optimists. We don't think that we're on the back foot in Central Europe. Sucks to suck. We'll get there. Takes a lot of work. But hey, we got our work cut out for us here in the United States, or wherever you're watching from yourself. So, can't sit around and complain too much, but we do have to just analyze where we've made these mistakes, why things have gone the way that they have, and really push to make sure that our socialist, democratic socialist, social democrat, whatever, left-wing, or even nominally left-wing parties are doing, is actually going to be socialist, rather than just neoliberal in a red coat. Another way you can support us is by following us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Former OC cop used database to track woman, contacted her thousands of times. April 15, 2026, via LA Times. Former Costa Mesa police officer admitted he called and messaged a woman he had an extramarital relationship with thousands of times and used confidential law enforcement databases to track her location, according to authorities. Robert J. Jossett, 35, of Costa Mesa, pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor count of unauthorized computer access and fraud, one misdemeanor count of annoying and repeated phone calls, and one misdemeanor account of contempt of court for violating a restraining order, the Orange County District Attorney's Office said in a news release. Jossett admitted to contacting the woman sometimes more than 100 times a day during a period of 9 months. He also violated a restraining order by driving by her house after he was given notice that he would be fired by the Costa Mesa Police Department. He also used law enforcement databases to track the location of his wife, as well as the woman with whom he had an affair. Jossett was ordered to complete a 52-week domestic violence program and sentenced to 3 years of informal probation. He already spent 9 months wearing a court-ordered GPS ankle monitor after he was arrested. The actions engaged by someone employed as a sworn police officer are obsessive, they are frightening, and they are dangerous, Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer said in a statement. No one should have to live in fear of being tracked through law enforcement databases by someone with a badge and a gun because they've decided to call off a romantic relationship. And no one gets to hide behind the badge as a shield for engaging in criminal behavior. Between June 2023 and December 2023, Jossett used the California law enforcement telecommunications system to make 13 inquiries into people, including the woman and his wife, as well as vehicles unrelated to his job, according to the district attorney's office. Jossett was placed on leave from the Costa Mesa Police Department in December 2023. In April 24, after Jossett's ex broke up with him, he threatened to reveal explicit photos of her and demanded to know if she'd had sex with someone else, according to the district attorney's office. He started calling her and her new boyfriend as many as 58 times a day and drove by her house. He also illegally accessed the police department's license plate reader system in June 2024 to track the location of her new boyfriend in Torrance. On June 28, 2024, Jossett was served with an emergency protective order and given notice of intent to terminate from the Costa Mesa Police Department. Jossett left the police department and drove by the woman's home in violation of the restraining order and was arrested. Jossett's actions were reported to the California Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, which oversees licensing for law enforcement officers in California. A police officer using his power for his own gain and abusing innocent people? Oh my God, that's so unheard of in this country. But the real takeaway here is, well, maybe not the real takeaway. Part of the takeaway here is the sheer intensity of the surveillance state. That this guy can, by way of his access to that surveillance program, can track and stalk people and harass them nearly endlessly over the course of a few months with very little stopping him. I mean, eventually he got fired, but at first you just put on administrative leave and then still harassing people. No one came to prevent him from doing so. Part of that is because it's only made possible through the access of the intense surveillance of the police state. And that's scary and upsetting. But also because of the blue wall of silence that the police have, where they really have no interest in investigating or stopping each other. We know that up to 40% of police officers are engage in domestic violence against their families. And the other 60% do nothing about it. And that's what this guy is. He went through domestic violence training, which hopefully means that he's not able to access a gun. Domestic violence is one of the things that prohibits you in the United States from being able to purchase firearms, so hopefully he doesn't have those. And it's his entire police culture that has empowered him to do this endlessly. But really, it's also a clear-cut tale of misogyny. His entitlement to not one, but two separate women. And because of his allegiance to state power and his access to state power, he can get away with it and go to lengths that the rest of us, thankfully, cannot, nor do any of us want to. But it's terrifying to think that any police officer, if they have a grudge, if they have it out for you in any way, can theoretically do the exact same thing. They can stalk you from afar using the surveillance technology, and no one's going to stop them. And particularly if you are a woman and the police officer is a man, you are at immense risk from this. So this is why we say ACAB, all cops are bastards. Because the core of American policing is, of course, protecting the capital from the workers, not protecting the people. If this guy were hired to protect the people, or if police in general were hired to protect the people, this guy would have been done away with a lot sooner. But he wasn't, because American culture, American policing culture in particular, is about ensuring that capital, not people, are safe. American culture allows and justifies male violence and male harassment of women, and patriarchy in general gives him a slap on the wrist for it. Now again, he did eventually go to jail for breaking the court orders, but why did he feel confident doing so? Because of his role in policing, because of his ability to go that far due to his proximity to power, and particularly male violent power. Now again, should not be legally capable or able to own a gun, which is fantastic. Hopefully he won't be able to hurt people any more than he already has if he's going to domestic violence training. It was a 52-week program. I don't know how long typical programs for domestic violence are. That sounds a bit excessive to me, but I don't know. I'm never going to be sent to domestic violence treatment. So, beats me. But, it's a real problem in the United States, not just amongst police, but especially amongst police, because of the borderline limitless power that they have over people in their community, and especially over their families, because again, with the blue wall of silence, other police officers are not going to stop them. They're not going to betray the brotherhood or whatever other dumb things that they believe that allows them or empowers them to get away with all sorts of abuses against the public, especially their intimate partners. And that the patriarchy in America, and the West at large, but in America in particular, encourages and allows this belief that men are entitled to women, that men have the power to own, possess, hurt, and abuse women, and are permitted to engage in those behaviors with relatively little consequence. Clearly, this is not a guy who thinks that abusing women is wrong. It's not a guy who thinks that stalking women is wrong, or at least not that wrong, not wrong enough to convince him to not do it. And again, a lot of this has to do with not just his role as a man in American society, because we've seen this before. We've seen random people who have no connection to police stalk, harass, and sometimes murder their intimate partners, or people who have nothing to do with them, but simply rejected being one of those romantic partners. And we've also seen women do things like call ex-boyfriends, 100,000 times a week. News articles pop up every now and then about it. But it's the state power involved here that takes us to another level. The state power of surveillance and the state power that allowed him to get away with this with little consequence. Because if anyone else had been doing this kind of thing to their partner, the police wouldn't let them have access to their databases. The police wouldn't allow them to just be on administrative leave. If you were doing this to people, your boss wouldn't just put you on leave and then eventually fire you later when it continued. It is the intersection of patriarchal violence and capitalist state violence that has allowed this guy to stalk, harass, and abuse two different women in his life. How he ever, won the affections of 2 different women is beyond me, given how much of a freak this guy is. But, obviously he was pretty good at hiding it until it was too late for them. So hopefully these women get the justice that they deserve. Hopefully we're able to have our own version of our great proletarian cultural revolution and purge this sort of behavior from our communities. And hopefully none of us tolerate similar views of possession of women in our communities from our friends, our family, or people in our circles. If you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. A town of 7,000 plans so many data centers, it's like adding 51 Walmarts. April 26, 2026, via the Washington Post. Tim Batchik would look out into his backyard most evenings to see wildlife emerging from the forest of birch, maple, and oak trees hugging his property. He regularly spotted black bears, deer, and coyotes. Owls would hoot and turkeys would scurry. Batchik, a 43-year-old public school teacher, saw the activity as a sign this former coal town had recharged from its polluting past. Then last month, Batchik woke up to the sound of chainsaws. Workers were cutting down the forest, around 180 acres of trees, to make way for a massive data center. Those animals now have no place to go, Batchik said on a recent afternoon as he looked out at the vast landscape of tree stumps. It's disgusting. Why are they putting these things near us, near our schools, and near our parks? Throughout Archbald, a northeastern Pennsylvania town of 7,000 people tucked in a valley near the Pocono Mountains, residents are asking similar questions as the community emerges as one of the latest frontiers in the nation's increasingly chaotic battles over data centers. Developers plan to build 6 of the sprawling campuses in Archbald to power the demand for artificial intelligence, eventually covering around 14% of the town's land. Those campuses would include 51 data warehouses, each about the size of a Walmart supercenter, including 7 buildings encompassing more than 1 million square feet near Batchik's home. For years, developers planned to make the community, which sits beneath a major interstate power line, a hub for data storage went largely unnoticed. But as word began circulating last year about Borough Council zoning changes to allow for the development, residents have rebelled and have launched one of the most contentious grassroots campaigns in local history. They are organizing on social media, overwhelming community meetings, and calling for the ouster of some key local officials. Over the past month, most of the 7-person Archbald Borough Council, along with several planning board members, have resigned. At least 2 of the council members said they left their positions out of fear for their safety after shots were fired at the home of an Indiana politician who found a no data centers note on his doorstep. As the acrimony over data centers intensifies, developers appear to be pressing ahead with their plans in Archbald, even as they refuse to tell the community what technology firms will occupy the buildings. The showdown could have nationwide implications over whether local activists can stop massive data center projects. This debate has destroyed this community, Archbald Mayor Shirley Barrett, a Democrat, said. We want answers, but we have no clue what is going on because this is all happening so quickly. In recent months, clashes over data centers have become some of the testiest local and state political debates. President Donald Trump and many state leaders have welcomed data center construction, arguing they fuel economic development and are needed to fortify the nation's technological advancements. But a growing number of communities, from small towns to big cities, are pushing back against the often secretive plans. They cite a range of concerns, from the size and noise to fears that they could overwhelm local energy grids and water supplies. Public opinion has rapidly shifted against data centers. In several communities, lawmakers are responding with local moratoriums on large data centers. This month, legislators in Maine passed the nation's first statewide ban on large data centers, a move the governor has since vetoed. Here in Pennsylvania, opposition is forcing some political leaders, including Governor Josh Shapiro, a Democrat, to rethink how the project should be managed. Shapiro, who had implemented policies that would fast-track data center construction to spur economic growth, is now supporting tighter reviews on how they affect local communities. We need to be selective about the projects that get built here, Shapiro said during his budget address this spring. Residents in Archbald, located in Lackawanna County, are baffled over how their community became ground zero in the push to build more data centers. The town is so small that some of its most recognizable buildings are funeral homes. But representatives for the developers say the area is attractive because it sits near the nuclear-powered 500 kilovolt Susquehanna-Roseland power line that slices through the county. Archbald also has abundant fresh water and land, since most of its coal mines shut down by the early 20th century. In 2023, Archibald's government took the first steps towards allowing data centers when they approved new zoning requirements that contained language permitting data centers, including an internet server building. The ordinance passed with little community opposition. But in early 2025, Kaylee Cornell and several other residents began hearing that the Project Gravity data center had begun applying for permits needed to begin construction on 7 two-story buildings near her family home. Cornell quickly learned that 2 other data center projects were also proposed under the 2023 zoning changes. "That is when things got real for me," said Cornell, who also heads up the Archibald Neighborhood Association. "So I just started looking around to see what the impacts would be. It was kind of a big, slow surprise." Cornell began organizing community meetings last summer at a local library to research and discuss the data center projects. By the fall, hundreds of residents had gotten involved. Despite the building opposition, the Archibald Borough Council moved to amend the town zoning code in November, which clarified some parts of the 2023 law, but also opened up more areas of the town for development. It defined what a data center was, said Dave Moran, who was a Borough Council president when the new zoning ordinance was approved. It laid out what restrictions developers had to work with and defined where they could be built. Within weeks of the approved changes, 3 more developers applied to construct data centers in the town. Meanwhile, community opposition continues to swell from those who said leaders aren't doing enough to communicate possible risks. "I want to know the effects of electricity usage, water usage, noise pollution, light pollution," said Michael Pilch, 54, a resident who joined the campaign. A Facebook group opposing the data centers now has nearly 10,000 members, outstripping the population of the town. Hundreds have put up bright yellow "No Data Center" signs in their front lawns, and residents have turned council and planning board meetings, typically sleepy affairs, into raucous community events. Opponents were further energized in March after Des Smog, an environmental news website, reported that developers had been in contact with borough officials before the zoning changes were made. The company successfully pushed, Des Smog reported, to increase the distance between data centers and residential properties. Archibald residents crammed into the next Borough Council meeting on March 18th and launched a petition calling to oust the council members who supported the rezoning, as well as the borough's manager, solicitor, and zoning officer. "The public trust has been violated," the petition reads. "Borough governance must be conducted in the interest of the public, not shaped in private by the interests of developers seeking approvals." Developers' plans would drastically alter Archibald's landscape, residents here said. One project, Wildcat Ridge, had applied to build 14 two-story data centers on 400 acres of forest land near the base of a mountain. The developer, Cornell Realty Management, mailed residents a magazine-style pamphlet describing the complex as ultramodern, adding that it would help generate $7 million in annual tax revenue for the borough and another $23 million for the school system. The Wildcat Ridge data center campus will be designed with an integrated architectural and landscaping elements, the pamphlet said. The flyers, part of an extensive public relations campaign designed to win over residents, said the campus would be at least 1,500 feet from anyone's home, would be no louder than a, quote, normal conversation at home, and create 1,280 new permanent jobs. The building also would use an average of 50,000 gallons of water a day, not the 3.3 million gallons that opponents have suggested, developers noted. The tensions came to a head at a meeting in mid-April for the Borough Council to reconsider the Wildcat Ridge zoning application. About 500 residents were packed in the meeting where Edmund J. Campbell Jr., a lawyer for the developer, was met with jeers, whistles, and taunts. One by one, residents approached the stage and threw the glossy pamphlets about the Wildcat Ridge project into the garbage. "They think we're stupid, and they think we're pushovers," said Judy Quinlan, 81, who added Archibald residents were ready to stand in front of bulldozers to halt the construction. Several prominent local officials, including the Lackawanna County Controller, a county commissioner, and a former judge, spoke out during the hearing to oppose Wildcat Ridge development. "Pack your bags and get out of this place," Thomas Munley, who retired as the county's chief judge in 2022, yelled at Campbell and several consultants for the developer. "Don't come back." Campbell declined to comment. Cornell Realty Management officials did not return requests for comment. If all the data centers are built, they'd occupy about 2.5 miles of land and be clustered near Archibald Pothole State Park, a 150-acre forest that includes a 38-foot hole that dates to the Ice Age. One of the data center campuses would be built over a trailer park, forcing out dozens of tenants. Joseph Pullman, who said his 3-bedroom house is about 900 feet from the proposed Wildcat Ridge campus, wonders if he'll be able to stay in his home if the project moves ahead. The 70-year-old retired mechanic, who is raising his 9-year-old granddaughter, recently paid off the house he has lived in for 38 years. Site plans show it might soon sit near 574 diesel generators, designed to be a backup power source for the data centers. "I didn't work 38 years to sit here and listen to a data center 24/7, 365 days a year, said Pullman, who added as his voice broke with emotion that he worries it's too late to fend off the development. "We know we are going up against some really wealthy people," Pullman said. "This all seems too baked in already for anyone to really do anything about it." Others in the town said their fight is far from over. Pilch, a lifelong Archbald resident, said he's increasingly heartened by several small wins in the community's battle over data centers. Last month, the Archbald Borough Council unanimously denied a permit to an applicant that proposed an 18-building campus. Opponents had argued during hearings on the project that plans were not properly communicated to the public. An attorney for the applicant, Provident Realty Advisors, did not respond to a request for comment. Provident has appealed the decision. It was during the meeting when the permit was denied that an Archbald council member, who had initially supported the zoning amendments, abruptly resigned. 2 weeks later, when the council met to fill the vacant seat, 3 more council members who had voted for the zoning that allowed data centers also resigned, including Moran, the former president. As the resignations were announced, audience members cheered and exchanged hugs. In his resignation letter, Moran said he had great concern for his health and his family after gunshots were fired at the home of the Indianapolis politician who'd supported data centers in his state. "I want to caution my fellow council members, the planning commission members, and zoning board members to be careful of the many unstable people," Moran wrote. "Please remember your family should come first." Moran also appeared to take aim at his Archbald critics, writing, "Social media is proving to be the downfall of good government." Another council member who resigned, Marie Andrioli, said in an interview she had grown overwhelmed by data center opponents' meanness on social media, adding criticism had become personal instead of business. 3 of the 4 council members who resigned have now been replaced by data center opponents, with 1 seat still vacant. It could be months or years before any data centers are built in Archbald. Once plans are approved by the local planning board, state and local permits are needed before construction can start. Project Gravity was accepted last fall into a fast-track permitting process launched by Governor Shapiro to stimulate economic development. But the application is now on hold, pending additional documentation from the developers, state officials said. The developers' decision to clear the trees from the proposed development site angered community members who accused the company of taking advantage of an environmental regulation loophole. In Pennsylvania, developers must obtain permits for earth activities and stormwater discharge. Project Gravity had applied for those permits, but none were issued, said Patty Monahan, a spokeswoman for the Pennsylvania Department of the Environment. But permits are not required to simply cut trees on private property, so long as the earth is not disturbed. Project Gravity hurriedly took that action last month, said Jerry Stiles, a district manager for the Lackawanna County Conservation District. "If you literally walk around with a chainsaw, cutting them and felling them and leaving them where they fell, that is not earth disturbance," Stiles said. Larry West, a local activist and new borough council member, said the tree cutting revived the wounds and hidden scars in a community where it took decades for the coal dust to be cleared. The town's trees, West noted, cover abandoned mines. "Now it's happening again, but this time it's data centers," he added. Baychak also believes his property will never be the same, even if the Project Gravity site is never completed. He recently installed blinds on his enclosed patio in an attempt to dull the pain he felt whenever he looked out at what used to be the forest lining his backyard. "No one wants this," Baychak said, "except the people making money off it." Solidarity Television is an independent grassroots news organization. That means we rely exclusively on viewers like you. Support us at solidaritytelevision.org. Hey, every week there's more news than we can reasonably cover here. So here's a few more news articles that we think you should know. FIFA urged to push U.S. for ice truce at World Cup by rights group. April 28, 2026 via Al Jazeera. FIFA should press the United States government to establish an ice truce for this year's World Cup, including a public guarantee from federal authorities to refrain from immigration enforcement operations at games and venues, Human Rights Watch has said in a report. The 2026 World Cup, the first edition of the global showpiece tournament to feature 48 teams, will be co-hosted by the U.S., Canada, and Mexico from June 11th to July 19th. Rights groups have condemned the crackdown, saying it has led to violations of free speech and due process rights and created an unsafe environment, particularly for minorities. Trump casts his actions as necessary to improve domestic security and curb undocumented immigration. FIFA needs to act urgently to address the risks of human rights abuses for athletes, fans, and workers, Human Rights Watch said. One concrete thing it should do is work to persuade the Trump administration to establish an ice truce. The FIFA 2026 World Cup will no doubt be one of the greatest and most spectacular events in the history of mankind, attracting millions of fans from around the world to 11 host cities across America, White House spokesman Davis Ingle told the Reuters news agency. President Trump is focused on ensuring that this is not only an incredible experience for all fans and visitors, but also the safest and most secure in history, and no amount of ridiculous scare tactics driven by liberal activist groups and the left-wing media will change that. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of The People's Report. Don't forget to subscribe at solidaritytelevision.org, organizing the working classes of the world in solidarity forever.